We know that phones, technology, social media have produced problems for the world today, problems for young people today, let alone older people. But just how bad are those problems? Let's talk about it. Jonathan Haidt appeared on the Trigonometry podcast where he talked about just how much of a problem screens, scrolling, social media, especially giving this now to new generations of children, just how much of a problem this is, and we have to talk about this. Now, I've done videos on Jonathan Haidt before. I've covered also one of the more popular videos on my channel is Abigail Schreier talking about problems as well related to kids and their growth and their development that is stunted by social media, screens, phones, and things like that. Now, Jonathan Haidt has a new book coming out, and I'd recommend his book very much. He's really well studied in this area, does a lot of work, a lot of teaching at a university in this area. But here he's going to share some really shocking things about neural development and kids and phones and screens. And this doesn't just apply to kids, but also adults. But again, it very specifically is really hurting people with developing brains. You've got to see this.
Called childhood. We have to let that unfold. Kids have to spend enormous amounts of time playing with each other, hanging out, teasing each other, unsupervised. No adult coming and saying, no, don't say that. Oh no, you go sit in the, just let them work it out. Obviously, there are cases of bullying. We have to attend to that. But other than those limited cases, let kids work it out. Let them get most of the way through puberty. This is a key idea in the book. I really came to see that puberty is this incredibly important period where the whole brain is rewiring from the child form to the adult form, and it happens in stages from back to front, more or less. The last part to rewire is the prefrontal cortex. And this is happening, around 13 to 16 in that period. And it continues on to 25. But it's completely insane that when puberty starts, which is around 11 or 12 for girls and around 13 or 14 for boys, when puberty starts is basically when we give them a phone and say, how about no more real world experience? How about you spend 10 hours a day on this thing? And your brain isn't going to, neural rewiring is this incredibly complex dance. And just as if we gave our kids alcohol every hour, that would disrupt neural growth. Well, I would say giving them 4 hours a day of video games for the boys or 5 hours a day of video games for the girls, it's going to disrupt neural growth.
That's so scary for him to hear. Again, he's a social psychologist, author, professor, things like that. For him to compare social media, screens, phones, smartphones with alcohol, giving alcohol to children is so insanely scary to hear. But I think a lot of people who are hearing this will intuitively understand this. Maybe not fully, it's not fully fleshed out, but I think we can all understand there is something very drug-like addictive to this, especially when you give it to a child.
And this is anecdotal, but I was a teacher for many years, and everyone's going to drink because it's now become a hack comment on this podcast from me. But one of the things that I noticed, because I was a drama teacher, and a lot of drama teaching in the UK is you give children a set of stimulus, and then they create their own plays, improvised plays around the stimulus. And I remember talking with the drama teachers halfway into my career, and we were going, I think kids are becoming less imaginative.
What year was this around? What?
This was around 2015,
okay,
2016.
Yeah,
and we started to notice that the quality of work that the kids were doing was degrading.
There's a lot going on there. The one thing I can say with some confidence is the fragmentation of attention.
I will say this, not just him, almost any teacher you talk to will say the exact same thing.
This is very general. The ability, so the one thing the prefrontal cortex does is called executive function. It's the ability to make a plan, say, like this morning, I said, okay, I would need to be here at 9:30, and I thought about the different methods, and I made a plan, and then I stuck to the plan, because I have a normal prefrontal cortex. And if you disrupt that, if you're constantly, in the early teen years, if you're constantly being divided, you have all kinds of stuff coming in, that part doesn't develop as well. So this is one of the most common comments we hear about Gen Z, is that it's very difficult for them to stay on task. In fact, their brains have become accustomed to such a constant incoming stream of information that a lot of them have trouble watching a video because it's not enough stimulation. So they do this thing, there'll be, and I've seen people have sent me these things, there's like a video of me giving a talk, and underneath it is a video of a video game going on. Yep. They need two things at once. If they're at the computer, they need the phone as well. And so this is inhuman. This is what we're doing to kids in preventing them from developing executive function is going to hurt them for the rest of their lives. So that's a very general comment. Now, as for creativity, that's quite possible. I haven't studied that. I don't have like a specific mechanism. But in general, creativity requires you take in a lot of stuff and you put out stuff, and then you get criticism. So you've got to have this back and forth with the world to be creative. But now that kids are basically taking in 10, 50 times as much stuff as we did when we were young, the stuff is coming in, not a lot is coming out. And they're not doing a lot of writing. They're not writing books. They're not starting companies even.
You notice that the stuff is coming in, but not a lot of it is coming out. They're taking in information, but they're not that much working on output, creating something that is interesting.
Towards the end of my time in education, I noticed that there were far more arguments, there were far more fights between kids because their social skills had diminished. So they couldn't find a way to negotiate conflict. And people were like, oh, it's because they're spoiled. And I was like, I don't think it is. I genuinely don't think they know how to communicate effectively.
That's right. So what we need to develop one-on-one communication skills. And something I realized in writing the book is I had to deal with this question of, well, aren't they playing online? Isn't that just as good? Aren't they socializing online? Like, what about a kid who's isolated? Here he has lots of friends. Isn't that just as good? And what I realized in writing the book is, no, actually there are 4 ways in which online interaction are not as good, or very different. So the first is that real life is embodied. And just what we're doing now, just like the rules of, like you guys are looking straight at me because I'm talking, but if I were to look straight at you while I was talking, that would be, it's kind of weird because you don't do that. So you have to work out rules of eye contact. And we're all communicating with our heads. It's not just our mouths. It's like our head movements are a very important part. So anyway, there's all these nonverbal channels. Online, you get emojis and you get a lot of uncertainty. You say something, you don't know how it landed, and you're anxious until they respond. So it's embodied. Real life is synchronous. Right now we have instant, really rapid back and forth. And now on a Zoom call or in some video games, you have that. So some parts of the virtual world are synchronous, but most are not. It's text-based. I say something, you misinterpret it, and then you tell other people. We lose that connection.
Man, so true. So much of the time, you read a message and you flip out. Maybe a lot of people flip out, and it turns out that's not even what the person meant. They didn't mean it that way, right? You can't translate tone a lot of the time through text messaging and things like that. It's so much of an inferior form of communication, and that is in many ways for a lot of people their primary form of communication. No wonder it's having so many bad consequences.
The third is that real life interactions are mostly one-to-one, or in this case 1-to-2, 1-to-a-few. You hang out with a group of friends. But once it becomes like a group text where a kid is posting and there's 80 kids, like the whole class is on this group text, it's not playful anymore. It's performative and it's anxiety provoking. Because you make one misstep and your reputation is trash. So it's scary. It's anxiety provoking. And then the final one is that real life communities in general are durable, whereas online communities are evanescent. Maybe there's 500 people in a group, and most will be gone by tomorrow. Almost nobody's going to be there a year from now. So kids need to be rooted in permanent communities. This is part of the human developmental plan. And in the online world, they just dip their toe into hundreds of little things. This, I think, is one of the major reasons why the thing that happens right around 2012, it's not just anxiety shooting up, it's not just depression shooting up, it's the sense of meaninglessness.
Man, that's so true. So many young people today, they are just passing through each other's lives. They're here for a little bit, then they're gone. And when it comes to online communities, they're here for a little bit, then they're gone. They might feel like they're going to be friends with these people forever. The next thing you know, it's been like a year, and they barely even think about them anymore. And it's not like real, lifelong, physical, durable relationships, friendships. It's funny. I was talking to someone. I feel like I was the last helicopter out of Vietnam when it comes to this stuff, because right before things got really bad with social media and stuff, I was already a good bit older. I wasn't like an 11-year-old, 12-year-old that had access to social media and things like that every day. I was a little bit older when I finally had Facebook on my phone. I think I was almost 18 years old. And even back then, it wasn't like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and all these and Snapchat, every other kind of social media. It was just the social media wasn't even that entertaining back then. It was just a place where you posted silly stuff and you used it as a vehicle to get together with friends. That was basically it. Now it is a replacement of relationships. It is from physical to durable relationships to not so durable, very elastic relationships. And again, this stuff is really, really bad. It has impacts on the church, on Christians, on our ability to seek God. I just preached a sermon about this at the Seagoville Church of Christ, where I'm the preacher, on this past Sunday. I will link that sermon in the description below. It's a little bit of a longer sermon than what I normally preach, but it applies so much to this, and I really think you'd enjoy it if you watched it.
There's all these really sad questions on these surveys. Sometimes I feel like my life has no meaning. Sometimes I think I'm no good at all. There's these really sad questions. And until 2012, the rates of agreement among American high school kids were very, very low. And then all of a sudden, right around 2012, as they move their lives onto the girls' social media, the boys' more video games, as they move their lives into the virtual world, They're lonely and they have a sense of meaninglessness. They're not rooted in anything.
So notice that. We know this for a fact. The feeling of meaninglessness has skyrocketed as people have transitioned from primarily physical, in-person relationships to virtual relationships. It has objectively made things worse for people.
So this is why I call it the great rewiring of childhood. And it's become something inhuman, and we have to roll it back.
Just to finish this.
Notice that language. It has become something inhuman. It has become something inhuman. This is not supposed to be the way our brains work. We are rewiring the way kids' brains develop in a negative way. We are messing up the way our brains work. Those of us who already have developed brains, it's even messed with us. If you are someone who's above 25 and your brain has developed, you know the impact that social media has had on you. You know that. If you're 30, 40, 50, 60, you know the impact that it's had on you. Just having a smartphone with everything on it and social media at your fingertips every single day, you know the impact that it's had on you. And objectively speaking, or if you just used in overall terms, you know that it would be better if nobody had it and we were just living the way humans have always lived for all human history. We are in completely unprecedented times here, and the times that we're living in, we are playing with this dangerous drug. It can be used as a tool, and it can be used for communication and all that stuff, and that stuff is good, but it's also highly addictive and very, very dangerous and really, really bad for people's brains.
What we call middle school in the United States, grades 6, 7, and 8, roughly ages 11 to 13. This is when bullying peaks. Around 7th grade is when bullying peaks. And these are very difficult developmental years, especially for girls. Their bodies are changing. They're insecure. They're being judged by their looks, by their breast size. It's such a difficult time for girls. And that's right when we introduce this crazy thing where everyone can say anything about anyone, often anonymously. And you take all the difficulties of adolescence, especially for girls, and you multiply them by 10. Oh, and then let's add in strangers. You can talk to strangers without your parents knowing.
Man, this all is so incredibly concerning. I don't want to just share the problem, though. I do want to share with you a couple of things that I shared in this recent sermon that I preached at the Sigerville Church of Christ out here in the Dallas area. And if you're ever in the area, please come and visit. I read a quote by Blaise Pascal: "The sole cause of man's unhappiness is that he does not know how to stay quietly in his room." And that's from 1670, a really long time ago. And even back then, he says, man doesn't know how to stay quietly in his room. He's not dealing with the major, big questions of life. He is distracting himself from them. And that's certainly what so many of us, if not the majority of us, are doing in this life. We're using technology, social media, our screens to distract us from dealing with the big questions of life. Now, from a Christian perspective, what is the problem with this? Well, one problem with it is that we are told in Psalm 46:10, and again, these are just screenshots from my sermon this past Sunday, "Be still and know that I am God." One of the most crucial things as a Christian that you need to be able to do is to be still within your mind. You need to be able to just sit in the stillness of it and not constantly just be seeking noise and stimulation, and without that, again, you're not happy. In Psalm 4:4, meditate within your heart, on your bed, and be still. Literally lay down and take time to think. Don't just go to sleep every night with your phone in your face, distracted until you fall asleep, and then wake up the next day still distracted. Because the very next verse, Psalm 5 and verse number 3, my voice you shall hear in the morning, O Lord. In the morning I will direct it to you and I will look up. So many of us, though, when we wake up in the morning, the first thing we do is not direct our voice to the Lord, our minds to the Lord. We direct our minds back to the distractions. We're just constantly in this loop. Awake, distracted, sleep, awake, distracted, sleep. Meditate on these things. Give yourself entirely to them that your progress may be evident to all. 1 Timothy 4 and verse number 15. Take time to think, to meditate upon things that matter, but you won't do that if you're distracting yourself. There's more verses that I shared in this entire process, but these are some of the important ones. I'm not the kind of person that's going to say all stimulation, all entertainment is wrong. Of course it's not. It has its time and its place, but for so many, that is the only thing that they really do in their life is just seek after stimulation, the distractions. It is so incredibly dangerous. We have to understand this for what it is. This is a dangerous thing, especially when we give it to people that are very, very young. We are rewiring their brains. We are messing with them. We are stealing their lives that they could have. So many of us grew up and had really happy, comparatively speaking, childhoods. And yet we are giving them something that is objectively worse, than what we had. For the sake of what? I really want to hear your thoughts about this. Let me know what you think. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, consider supporting on Patreon, and please share this video with a friend. I really want some feedback on this. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Does this make any sense at all? Let me know what you think. I love you very much. I'm glad you've been here. God bless you. I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.